Thank you everyone for joining us today for our winter lecture series, In Their Own Words, and tonight's lecture, When Neighbors Were Neighbors, Character Studies by Cornelia Huntington, 1803 to 1890 from her diary, with Barbara Borsack and Hugh King. Cornelia Huntington had two diaries. Diary number one is dated 1821 to 1824, and diary number two is dated 1861 to 1863. My name is Marianne, Della, and I will be your moderator this evening. Please join me in welcoming our lecture series chairwoman and tonight's speaker, Barbara Borsack, and East Hampton site manager of the Home Sweet Home Museum speaker, Hugh King. Hugh, take it away.
Okay, I think the first thing we have to do is thank Susan Leminski. She is the one who got these diaries into the Long Island room, and I think they were transcribed. So without that effort, we wouldn't be doing this lecture tonight. And it was such a wonderful, wonderful gift. And wait till you hear what Barbara has to tell you tonight. Cornelia, of course, was the daughter of Dr. Abel Huntington. Now, she had a sister named Marietta that I didn't know about. We're going to hear about her later. She lived with her parents and the rest of the family. Now, I have her sister Abby, that's probably her mother, her brother George Huntington, and a visitor from Scotland, John Wallace, one of the founders of St. Luke's Church. Now, she lived on Main Street, about 3 or 4 doors down from the present Guild Hall. But she later lived with her brother George on Newtown Lane, just about where Whittendale's is now. And of course, she had a nephew, George Huntington, who wrote a paper about something called Huntington's Korea. That's what the Korea is named after. And if we have time, we'll talk about that later. All right, the last thing I'm going to say is listen to what Barbara tells you and see if you can figure out how did Cornelia Huntington know all this. All right, I'm done.
March 8th, 1821, Sunday afternoon. I've been to church this blessed day, and I don't intend to go again very soon. I received a letter yesterday from Lois. The wind blows very hard. It's cold weather for this season. Wednesday evening, 10 o'clock. I've had the honor, and I suppose I may say pleasure, of spending the evening with Mr. Fithian. I can't think it is quite right for all our beaux to go abroad for wives when there are so many fine girls in East Hampton, for instance, myself. It is truly a delightful evening. On such a night as this, how will the image of past times haunt the imagination? A fine evening always conjures up 10,000 recollections, pleasing perhaps, though they excite a feeling of melancholy loneliness. The mild beams of the moon harmonize and elevate the soul, and I never feel so at peace with all mankind as when I sigh and gaze upon her beautiful face. If one has friends who are dear to him on such a night as this, he will think of them with emotions of tenderness unfelt at any other time. Saturday evening. A violent thunderstorm. The rain pours sweetly. This will be very refreshing to the drooping vegetation. George has been out sporting this afternoon and killed 6 birds. This will be very encouraging to him. Monday afternoon. Henry L. Mulford has forbidden all persons gathering cranberries on his meadow excepting Jerusha and myself, and he gives us permission to go whenever we please. Ah, we are privileged girls. The beaux can't withstand our united charms. Tuesday evening. I've had an introduction to Mr. Albert Osborne this evening. He appears to be a very pleasant little fellow. I think I must try to set my cap for him. But I warrant he's engaged, for all the beaux are. What a multitude of old maids are gathering on thy borders. Marriages here are like angel visits, few and far between. I'm extremely sorry that there should be such a paucity of beaux in this poor degraded spot. Old maid! My blood runs cold at the bare idea of being one on the detested list. Alack-a-daisy, my prospects at present are gloomy indeed. Well, I must try to be resigned. I must paint my withered cheeks and curl my gray locks and make myself as detestable as any old hag among them. As punishment for my uncivil language, I deserve to be an old maid myself, and punishment enough that would be, God knows. Wednesday evening, 10 o'clock. I shall not write much this time, I presume, for I'm so completely fatigued that I can scarcely stand. I've been to the beach this afternoon, And what with the length of the walk and frolic in the sand, I found means to fatigue myself very much. I found the beaux very sociable and pleasant, and on the whole spent a very agreeable afternoon very agreeably. And I endeavored to be my agreeablest in order to captivate the gentlemen, but I fear I did not succeed. Never mind, however. Thursday evening, we just received accounts of the dreadful ravage made by the gale on Monday night. 4 vessels belonging to Mauritius were lost, with every person on board excepting 2 or 3. Alas, how uncertain is human destiny. How many a noble heart has one short hour stilled forever, and how many have been robbed of happiness and called to mourn over the wreck of every earthly hope. Parents by this dreadful calamity have been torn from their children, and children from their parents.
Well, most men who died at sea were involved in the whaling trade, but the fatalities were due more to disease, bad doctoring, poor food, and dissipation on the infrequent shore leaves, not from the actual whale hunt. Now, what she's talking about, one of the ships that she's been talking about that crashed off of Mauritius was the Savannah. This is from Mrs. Rattray's book, Ship Ashore. The Savannah, first ship to use steam in crossing an ocean, went to pieces on Fire Island, opposite Mauritius on November 5th, 1821. All hands on board, 11 men were lost, including their captain, John Coles of Glen Cove, Long Island. Bought by a group of Savannah merchants, the ship sailed on May 26, 1819 from Savannah to Liverpool, England, with Captain Moses Rogers of New London, Connecticut, in command. She reached England 26 days later, having used steam the first 18 days, then sail. Under steam, she had a speed of 6 knots. On July 23rd, she left Liverpool for St. Petersburg, Russia, touching on the way at Copenhagen, Stockholm in Sweden. Royalty visited her, and the captain was showered with gifts and acclaim. After making history by introducing steam navigation on the high seas, the Savannah was converted to sail. She was on the Savannah, New York run when she met her end. And that's what she was talking about, one of the 4 boats, the Savannah. Okay.
Tuesday evening, September 13th, 1821. I had a most delectably exquisite ride yesterday afternoon to North Sea on a party of pleasure. I left home at 1 o'clock and drove to Fordham in 40 minutes precisely. Pretty smart driving for us East Enders. There we tasted the most delicious beverage that mortal ever quaffed, namely insipid, damaged wine. After a short stay, we recommenced our journey and made our second stage in 44 minutes. We should have had a charming ride if the wind had not blown violently and the dust almost suffocated us. From Southampton, we proceeded to North Sea. Returned to Foster's after having a complete frolic at Harris's. And we made rather a crooked course back over rocks and stumps and gullies, but we finally reached Southampton safely, though we like to have overset several times. Monday evening. I've had a fall this evening. As I was going through the yard, I was obliged to grope my way by the fence owing to the intense gloom of the night. I've heard of darkness being visible, but tonight I'm sure it was tangible. What occasioned my fall, I cannot tell, but I suppose the attraction of gravitation was more powerful than the attraction of cohesion. At any rate, I lost the center of gravity, and prone to the earth, I bowed my beauteous head. Friday evening. Oh, veil your face in darkness, for I must despair. Baldwin is married and hope is dead, or I am dead to hope. Card playing has become very fashionable of late in Santiago. McGigg and his ailing cousin have gone to Montauk Point. There they are to lodge in the haunted chamber, and I trust they will exorcise all the ghosts which have so long infested that fatal apartment. Should fate ever carry me again to Montauk, I should not be unwilling to occupy it, notwithstanding I was once much disturbed there.
We kept trying to figure out why she was talking about Santiago. And then I think we finally figured out that I think she read 3 or 4 newspapers a week. And if you look at the early newspapers, this at this time would be the Sag Harbor Corrector. if you read that paper or the Sag Harbor Express or the East Hampton Star, the first 4 or 5 pages were not about local news. They were about world news. So I think that's why she's talking about Santiago. Now, a trip to Montauk would be all day. Now, you'd stop in Amagansett to get a large branch. But before that, you went to the Hunting Inn in East Hampton and got some salve, okay? Then you got your branch in Amagansett. And when you traveled through the Napeague Stretch, you were meeting the largest, most hostile mosquitoes on the face of the earth. They even had to put a net over the horse, okay? And why were you going to Montauk besides visiting the lighthouse? You would pick cranberries or beach plums, I think. You would stop at First House for some refreshment, and then you would go on your way. Now, that stopped when Arthur Benson bought Montauk at auction in 1879. And the other story is supposedly when the road was finally paved towards Montauk in the 1920s, a man drove his car through the Napeague Stretch and was so incensed about the mosquitoes there that when he got to Montauk, he waited for the train to come and he put his car on the train and he came back that way. I hope it's true. Okay.
Sunday afternoon. All the good people, or those who wish to be thought so, have gone to church, while I, who under the very droppings of the sanctuary, stay home to starve the devil. In my humble opinion, I may as well be absent in body as mind, and I'm very sure that there is not enough interest in anything Jimmy may read to call home my wandering thoughts. Sanctity will address the throne of grace, but he will think more of folding his hands and closing his eyes in a graceful manner than of that grace which cometh down from above. The wind whistles drearily. Winter's approaching with rapid strides. If some of the friends with whom time used to pass so pleasantly could be restored, how delightfully the coming winter would fly by, but that is quite impossible. Many long, long miles lie between us, and death has snatched some from the little circle of my acquaintance who used to enliven every scene. Alas, what a changing scene is life. Sorrow and sadness embitter every situation, and unsatisfied desires render our existence a burden. Happiness is not for man, and in this state of imperfect enjoyment, to hope for it is folly.
Okay, the next thing you're going to be talking about is Mrs. Wickham. Now, they're living in the Wickham house. Mrs. Wickham was the wife of Thomas Wickham, a privateer during the American Revolution. Now, the Huntingtons were living in the former Thomas Wickham house, and I think she may have been living with them. And then we find out later that Colonel Wickham is still alive. So I'm just wondering if both of them were in the house at the same time with the Huntingtons, and their family. Now, people dying. The average lifespan in 1850 was 40 years. Now, everybody didn't die at 40. If you go to the cemetery, you'll see that people lived a lot longer than we think. And of course, the child mortality rate was huge. But common causes of death were consumption, which is tuberculosis, dropsy, which is the accumulation of lymph in body tissues and cavities, childbed fever, puerperal fever, infection after childbirth, pleurisy, dysentery, that's an infection of the intestinal tract, lockjaw, palsy, which is paralysis, fits, inflammation of the lungs, and believe it or not, old age. Okay, so those are the reasons. Now you're going to hear about Mrs. Wickham.
Tuesday evening. Mrs. Wickham lies hovering on the brink of the grave. A few fleeting hours and her earthly career is finished. Alas, how many, how endearing are the ties which bind us to life. How agonizing the event which severs them forever. And yet, when we consider how few are the real and substantial joys and how numerous the sorrows and calamities of life, we almost wonder that we can prize it. Indeed, man is but a vapor and life a vision, a disturbed and painful dream. I'm going over to Esquire Saxton's to help Maria make a shroud. Who will do the same for me? Perhaps an unknown person, a stranger. Oh, who would grieve to exchange this perturbed and unrefreshing slumber for that sweet sleep that knows no waking? Wednesday night, 12 o'clock. How mournfully the wind whistles. I am watching with Mrs. Wickham and must write to keep myself from drowsiness. How does the sunken countenance of Mrs. Wickham appall my courage? I listen in silence, almost fearing every breath will be the last. Death, thou art indeed the king of terrors. I will get some supper and try to divest myself of the horrible fancies which disturb me. Sunday evening. The last sad scene is over with Mrs. Wickham. Her cold remains are lodged in the grave, but her pure spirit has gone home to God. She left this world with perfect composure and apparently without regret. Her funeral was attended this afternoon by a very great number of people. Every room in the lower part of the house was crowded. Death is not so terrible to witness as I'd imagined. It is awful indeed to behold a friend in the agonies of death, but I did not feel the horror that I expected. The parting with our friends I should suppose to be the most painful trial, and the horror of annihilation, the dread of ceasing to be, of being forgotten upon earth, would be greater to me than the pains of death or the fear of anything that may come after it. Sunday afternoon. Just 1 week since Mrs. Wickham was placed in her narrow bed. The warring winds howl loudly this afternoon. Pa has gone to Sag Harbor. He'll see Ursula. I wish I could see her too. Any more news? Yes, David Conklin's house was burnt to the ground last night.
Now, you know, I just realized this. They had the wake in the house where Cornelia lived. So I'm pretty sure that Mrs. Wickham and Mr. Wickham were living there, because before funeral parlors, that's what you did, right? So I think we can be pretty sure of that now. Sag Harbor. Sag Harbor, of course, was the shopping center of Eastern Long Island because of the whaling trade. Special articles of clothing or something from faraway lands, alcohol and other spirits could be purchased in Sag Harbor, even a trip to the dentist. And a man named Jeremiah Baker ran a stage from Amagansett to Sag Harbor from 1858 to 1905, basically to pick up the mail. Before the Long Island Railroad came through in 1895, the mail would go to Sag Harbor. Mr. Baker would pick it up, come down Sag Harbor Turnpike, which is now Route 114, blow his horn, and come into East Hampton and possibly the Springs and deliver the mail. Okay, so Sag Harbor was very, very important. And of course, they have more bars than any other place in the world, too. Okay.
Sunday afternoon. The Reverend tries once more the effect of his oratorical powers upon the hearts of his flock. If he keeps hunting awake, he ought to feel perfectly satisfied. Thursday evening, December 28th. 'Tis almost 1 year since I commenced this book, and I confess I have not been as industrious as I anticipated, for I calculated to have filled it before now. Well, I have been to 2 marriage feasts since I opened my eternal journal, and bridal parties without number. Samuel is married, and Fithian is married, and Edward Hunting is married, and I am still upon the anti-matrimonial list. Natty, I fear, will have to take me out of pity in the year 55, unless he trusts himself elsewhere. But really, we had a fine, lively party at Captain Fithian's on Christmas Eve. The fiddles did play, and I danced until my poor tender feet wept crimson tears for the sins of their owner. Moreover, I set my cap for Mr. Rogers. Pop-Up has taken his departure for Albany. I should think he had got there by this time.
Yeah, Abel Huntington was had so many important jobs. He was a doctor in East Hampton for 62 years, only beaten by Dr. David Edwards, I think, who was a doctor for 64 years. He was also the East Hampton town supervisor, and he introduced the smallpox inoculation into the town. Now, the problem with the smallpox inoculation, they would give it to someone, a small dose of it, thinking then if they got it and they recovered, they would be immune. However, if you gave too much, or if the person was sick when you gave it to them, they could die. And that's what happened to Samuel Buell's son. It wasn't until Edward Benner realized that the women who were milking cows got cowpox, but they never got smallpox. So he invented this vaccine from the cowpox. Okay. He was also a state legislature, Dr. Abel Huntington. He was our representative in Congress. And we have a letter at Home Sweet Home that John Howard Payne is writing to Abel Huntington, looking for a job in the 1830s. He was a presidential elector. He was a delegate to the state constitutional convention, and he was a collector of customs at Sag Harbor. And I think he was the coroner at one time too. Now his son George Huntington was also supervisor of East Hampton. He was a doctor for 46 years, and of course the grandson George Huntington was the Huntington Korea fella, which we'll talk about some other time. Okay, I think that's it.
Saturday evening. Among the many questions which have furnished matter for dissension among the learned and the wise of all ages, there is none which has been more frequently agitated than the following: whether a state of nature or of cultivation is most conducive to the happiness and well-being of the human family. In all preceding periods of time, the female mind has been neglected as utterly undeserving of regard. Woman has been treated as the plaything, the slave, rather than as the rational companion of man. Her genius has been despised and her talents condemned. Even in some ages, denied the possession of other than animal or vegetable. She's been kept in a state of debasing servitude and degrading uselessness. Among the Greeks, the females were denied the benefit of education and kept in a state of intellectual darkness and mental degradation. But happily, for human nature, things are now taking the proper course. Man begins to discover, and however unwillingly, to confess his inferiority. And woman shines forth in all the light of intellectual glory. Man, weak-minded, degraded man, must now sink in silent submission to his own proper level and be content to move in more humble sphere for which nature had fitted him. While woman, lofty, adjuring, energetic, and commanding, dictates to him the terms of capitulation. Unskilled to legislate, inadequate to govern, without wit or energy to execute, without woman to aid, encourage, and to prompt, man would stand an insignificant, useless being in creation. Awakened by her voice, man rouses himself to action, stimulated by a desire of her praise. He exerts every faculty of his soul, strains every power, and straightens every nerve to execute her plans and put in force her laws. January 1822, Tuesday evening. I must confess, I think Mr. Mulford has grown handsome, or else my visual organs have hitherto been in fault. I don't know which, but I always thought my optics were very acute. I may have been mistaken, for human judgment is at all times fallible. Friday evening. The bell of old Clinton tolls for 9 and warns all, both old and young, soberly to repair to their homes. The wind blows loudly and portends an approaching storm. The moon is beaming brightly in the blue canopy of heaven. There's not one cloud to obscure her brilliant light. Mr. Gardner has preached the everlasting word of life to us this evening, and I listened to him attentively, but it was seed sown among thorns, for I have not yet broken up the fallow ground of my heart. Nancy Mulford has given her heart unto the Lord. I have not one objection to offer if they will let me alone. Monday evening, March 4th. Just 3 weeks since I've opened my book. However, I feel myself excusable as I've been out paying a visit. I have nothing of importance to commemorate. Stop. Have I not been sleigh riding with Mr. Gracie? And is that nothing? That is something surely worthy of remembrance. Then be it remembered that on Friday evening, Mr. William Johnson Rysam Gracie waited on my most delectable ladyship to the far famed village of Amagansett. The weather was cold and the sleighing poor, but the stars were bright and the beaux polite, and the ride delightful, you may be sure. Wednesday evening, January 1st. I shall be 20 years old in a few months. 20 years old. I shall be an old solitary in spite of all the refulgent graces of my person, or the still more fascinating charms which heaven has unsparing hand has lavished on my intellect. Well, I'll take the veil and turn Roman Catholic, not so much to expiate the sins of my heart as to conceal the wrinkles which the withering hand of time shall have planted on my brow. Sunday afternoon, meeting is out, and there is a great waving of feathers and veils. But I am so wicked that I prefer staying home and reading and writing nonsense, unless I could have a more comfortable place to go to church than the academy, and a more animated preacher than Mr. Phillips to listen to, though some tell me if I listened with proper spirit, I could take pleasure in hearing even him. 'Tis possible, I own. but I must be altered indeed when I feel anxious to hear a theological discourse from anybody. I think, however, I would go to a considerable distance to hear handsome John Darling deliver a sermon. He preaches sure enough. I should never be converted, I fear, by his exhortations, for I don't think he has any more business to preach than I have, and I am fully sensible that I am not fit.
You could see that Cornelia is not interested in going to the Presbyterian church. There are parts of her diary where she's sitting in the window watching them go by, because in 1820s, the Presbyterian church was right about where Pondview is, next to Guild Hall. The church was there until 1860, so she would watch people go by. In her room, she's talking about Ebenezer Phillips, who was the Presbyterian minister in 1822. Remember, there was no St. Luke's Church yet. That didn't happen until 1858, when I think the church was built. And she was one of the early communicants of St. Luke's. Now, why were they meeting in Clinton Academy? Well, we come to find out they were repairing the church in 1822. So they were using Clinton Academy for services. And Ebenezer Phillips actually rented the Mulford House while I was here. I guess there was no Presbyterian manse at the time. Okay.
May 1823. How calm, how beautiful the peaceful repose of nature. How tranquilizing the silent loneliness of an evening like this, when not a sound falls on the ear but the purring of the frogs in the distant marsh, or the ceaseless roar of the Atlantic. Once, upon such a night, my spirits were all upon the wing, and my thoughts roamed abroad through the earth in the wildness of their frolic, some fancies. I thought of past, present, and to come, of the past with feelings of pleasurable melancholy, of the present with calm satisfaction, of the future with rapturous anticipation. But such feelings have ceased to lighten the dark moments of my monotonous existence. Thursday evening, May 19th, 1822. I've had my long contemplated walk to the beach, and a solitary one it was, for I went unaccompanied except for my own agreeable thoughts. However, I think after all, a person's own thoughts are the most delightful companions in the world, for they will never quarrel with you or dispute your opinion on any subject. They take no offense at any idea or inspect the motive of any action. Everything is right with them, and we can give loose to all the feelings and imaginations to which passing objects may give rise, and obey every momentary impulse without fearing the censure or the ridicule of such silent friends. How beautiful the ocean looks. As the moonbeams play over its surface, it looks like a sheet of fire. I wonder where Ellen is now. If it's as warm in New York as it is here, I think she must suffer, for they do not feel our sweet ocean breezes. I should like to see John Darling this evening. I suppose he's at prayer about this time, for he is a very devout character. I hope he will remember me, for the prayer of the righteous availeth much. Wednesday afternoon, June 24th. This delightfully pleasant day completed the first 20 years of my life. Well, I shall always have roses to crown myself with when I choose to celebrate the day, for thank Providence I was born in the sweetest season of the year. No strange thing that I should be so sweet in my looks and harmonious in my disposition. I expect that in after ages my birthday will be celebrated. Wednesday evening. I think I may take great encouragement from Dr. Sherrill says he will send his son for me. He's rather younger than I am, 'tis true, but that's a trifle to what it might be. He says he has a great deal of taste, everybody likes him, and he thinks we should be greatly pleased with each other. I'll wait a spell for the youth, for I can't do otherwise, I see. Monday, June 30th. Another month has flown over my head so rapidly that I can barely believe it possible that I have not slept away at least 2/3 of it. Time at this rate will hurry me off in its course before I am aware of it. Tomorrow's sun ushers in the glorious month of July. Mr. Youngs preached the holy word to East Hampton sinners yesterday. I like his preaching very much, and his looks still better. Abby, I suppose, is enjoying herself completely at this time, strolling around the city with Ellen. Oh, how I wish I could be there too. Tuesday evening. The ocean roars very loud this evening. I think a stroll by its border this warm weather would be delightful, provided one had pleasant company, but alas, I have none, pleasant or unpleasant. so I shall hardly taste the pleasures of a starlight stroll this blessed night. And besides, upon reflection, I am much too fatigued to undertake it if I had all the company in the world. For it is now past 9 o'clock, and I have not rested from my labors one moment today. Wednesday evening, July 16th. The cushion for the new pulpit has arrived. It's beautiful, red silk damask. Now we only want Pearson or Barnes or some other handsome, animated young clergyman to make our church very attractive to the young ladies, at least. For nothing draws hearers like a handsome young priest of easy address, no matter what his doctrine. Well, I'm very sleepy, so I'll go to my rest. Monday evening. Well, I have led rather an idle life for a fortnight, but I must stop short where I am now and forswear parties for at least 2 months to come. Sam Gardner is married, so there is one more out of harm's way. I wish him and his bride all the happiness they deserve, and I don't know as their very best friend could do any more. I expect the fair bride has left some broken hearts, and possibly the bridegroom has too, but thank God mine is not among that unhappy number. Margaret leaves tomorrow with the bridal party to visit the falls of Niagara. Sunday afternoon, January 4th, 1824. It is so long since I have written anything in my register of good and evil, but I hardly know upon what subject to commence my present strictures. A great many strange and marvelous events have transpired to astonish the inhabitants of this hitherto peaceable corner of the earth, and in future I will never complain of want of variety. Abram Rose has taken to himself a wife to nurse him when he is drunk and scold at him when he is sober. The poor woman, she will have a chance to become an excellent nurse, but very little opportunity to improve in the art of scolding, an accomplishment very essential in the education of a good housewife. Saturday evening, February 7th, 1824. I've been this afternoon to see Mrs. Gardner, and a very sociable, pleasant time we've had. Yesterday, I visited Miss Maria Dayton, where I saw ever so many ladies. How very pleasant and edifying our East Hampton tea parties are. The gentlemen are all very intelligent and entertaining. I wish they would occur oftener, for I always return from them much wiser than I went. Tuesday evening, February 17th. Almost March. Spring will soon come, and I'm not half ready to see it. If spring is so near, I must go to work and do with my might whatsoever my hands find to do, for the time will soon come when there will be no work done. I must piece ever so many bed quilts, and then the good old grannies will say I'm going to be married. Oh, I had the supreme felicity of seeing Riceham Saturday. But they tell me he's going to be married very soon, so it's in vain for me to set my cap at him any longer.
Yeah, this Riceham family was very important to East Hampton and Sag Harbor history. William J. Riceham came to East Hampton after the American Revolution. Even though he was English, he had sympathies for the colonies, and he came to East Hampton. Why did he come to East Hampton with his 6 daughters? Not necessarily to get them married, but to get them an education. And where could they get an education? Starting in 1784 at Clinton Academy. And he eventually married a Phoebe Mulford, whose husband David died from smallpox in Connecticut during the American Revolution. He opened up a rope walk in Sag Harbor. I think he plied trade. Did he have a sawmill shipped to Honduras by the Dominies? But what he really did that was impactful is he gave $500 to the East Hampton Town trustees in his will. And they were going to use the interest. They could use the interest of that off of that money to pay for poor children to go to school. And if you look at the trustee records, you'll see that they have the Riceham account, and they'll have from Springs, from the Hook School, from the South Side, from Northwest, and they're paying for children whose parents couldn't pay for them to go to school. Well, this is before universal taxation. And they could only use the interest, and they still have the Riceham account today. The trustees, I think they give scholarships out with it. Okay.
Sunday afternoon, June 13th, 1824. Poor Carrie Gasner. I cannot but think her case a cruel one, just married and settled in life with one of the best husbands in the world, blessed with everything that is calculated to make life pleasant, to be hurried from them just at the moment when she had begun to taste that life is sweet, To be cut off in the morning of life in the brightest season of enjoyment, it is surely hard. Poor Gasner. What a severe disappointment to him to see his beautiful bride thus gradually sinking to the grave, with the sad conviction that he cannot save her. If man could prevent or money purchase relief, Caroline Gasner would not die, but alas, hers is a disease which has cut off every member of her family in the prime of life, consumption, hopeless, cureless, and poor Caroline is the last of the race, the final victim of that fatal constitutional consumption, which has previously deprived her of all her relatives. I promised to write to her, and I must do so very soon. Sunday afternoon, the bell of the Lord's sanctuary sending forth its deep and solemn peal, summoning to their afternoon devotions the pious and godly minded who dwell within hearing of its voice. Colonel Wickham has moved into his new house and is keeping Widower's Hall in very comfortable style. I've almost finished this book. When it's done, what will it be good for? And where shall I get another to spoil with my nonsense? Sunday afternoon, November 14th, 1824. 6 months since I have written one line. Alas, in the past 6 months, I've witnessed much of suffering and of death. I've seen the end of all flesh and viewed death at its most terrifying form. I've seen the final end of one in all the strength and pride of manhood and glowing with all the high hopes and flattering promises of youth. I've seen all this, and I've learned the instability of earthly prosperity, the vanity of earthly hopes. Poor John. How suddenly was his career terminated. How soon his sun of life, so brilliant at its rising, has set in darkness. Sunday, December 5th, 1824. I received a letter from Ellen last night containing what I've long been dreading, intelligence of the death of Mrs. Gasner. Her cancer has been a short one. 'Tis now about a year since she was married from poor Gasner. When he saw her then glowing with health and hope, how little did he think he was taking to his heart one whose death was so soon to make it deflate. Alas, she has been to him such a pleasing vision, a beautiful shadow which just gleamed across his pathway and then vanished forever. Poor Douglas, too, in the midst of his days, has gone down to the narrow bed. His death will be a severe affliction to his sisters, for he was their idol. Let his good qualities then be only remembered, and let his bad ones, if he had any, for I never saw them, be covered with the mantle of oblivion. Caroline Bedloe says Gasner talked in good spirits of getting another wife. I cannot think he can so have forgotten Carrie dear, as he called her, for he was one of the most affectionate husbands. Perhaps Caroline has yet to learn that people sometimes talk lightly when their hearts are aching. Not with that kind of nervous heartache of which she used to complain, but the deadly sickness of the heart which aided from hope deferred, from expectations disappointed. Prospects blasted from pleasure vanished, and may it be long indeed before she or I experience such a dismal heartache as that.
Boy, is she insightful, isn't it? It's amazing. Okay, now Barbara's going to talk about a trip to Gardiner's Island. I couldn't figure out why did she keep going to Gardiner's Island until Barbara said, well, Marietta, her sister, married a David Gardner. And I looked it up in Mrs. Rattray's book, and it was David Gardner VIII. He was the collector of the port of Sag Harbor, and he was a teacher at Clinton Academy. But his father was David Gardner, who wrote the Chronicles of East Hampton, and whose daughter Julia married a president of the United States, John Tyler. So that's why she's going over to the island. Now, if her sister is Marietta and her sister's Abby, now I don't know the mother's name. So maybe one of the Leminskas can tell us at the end of the story, because I botched that. I thought the mother was Marietta. Maybe she was. So we have a reveal at the end. Okay, I'm out.
Gardiner's Island, March 1826. I've been on the island more than a week, during which time the weather has been rainy and unpleasant, yet my time has passed delightfully away, and I shall never forget the happiness I've enjoyed in this little week of my existence. Indeed, the heart must be heavy laden which cannot find peace here. Shut out from the world with all its follies and vexations, and its temptations also. I could live in such a sweet, secluded place as this and never feel a momentary desire to mix with the gay world or to mingle in the amusements and dissipations which are followed with ardent pursuit by many, but which to me are tasteless and insipid. Time has been when I felt differently, but though sorrow has not my young days shaded, my heart, though not as sad, has long ceased to be a gay one, for no reason which I can assign. I've lost that buoyancy and elasticity of spirit which used to animate all my actions, and from the wildest and most thoughtless of nature's productions, I've become a sober and matron-like, perhaps I should say old maidish, in my deportment. I am cheerful without mirth, and I feel as if I had shook hands with laughter and levity forever. I have looked across the bay a great many times today, for it's the first day since I've been here that I have been able to discern the low, level shore and scarcely perceptible hills of my own native soil. But as the sun set tonight behind the dear isle which looked so lovely and so lone, I could not but feel that home is home, be it ever so homely. Ellen writes me she has no intention of bidding adieu to single blessedness. If I could see her, I would say, sour grapes, Ellen. George has brought a fine parcel of fishhawk's wings. I intend to pull them to pieces, for I see they have noble quills, and I imagine they could soar very lightly into the regions of fancy if I had a pen to record my ideas which had fanned the air of the heavens and laved the deepest waves of the Atlantic. 4th of July. I went to church in time to scrutinize the decorations, which I think were not in the best taste, and to witness the procession, which was but indifferent. Jeremiah, however, gave us an oration in very florid style. His language was very handsome, his ideas chaste, liberal, and enlarged, his delivery handsome, easy, and unaffected, and his whole appearance in the highest degree creditable. If he had any fault, it was that of soaring too high in the regions of fancy and indulging rather too freely in flights of imagination. But these are faults which a few years will mend. It is easy to clip the wings of the bird who towers highest, but utterly impossible to teach a groveling one to soar. I see by the papers that Peter Gassner is married again. So much for the strength of men's affection. I would not have believed when I saw him around the bed of his young wife, apparently so deeply and devotedly attached to her, watching every look and anticipating every wish, that he could so soon have forgotten her. I would not have believed when I saw her dying hand clasped in his, that ere that hand was yet cold in the grave, he could have plighted his affection to another. Poor Caroline, she did not dream of this when she told me in hoarse-broken whispers of the kindness and affection of her husband. Poor ill-fated girl. She did not dream that her place would so soon be occupied with another. But so it is. We pass away and are forgotten. This is the first pleasant evening we've had in a great while, and it is a delightful one indeed. The air is perfectly pure and salubrious. The moon shining with clear and tranquil beauty in her beam. How soothing is the influence of a mild moonlit evening upon the feelings. It awakens 1,000 soft and pensive recollections, revives feelings long passed away, and renews impressions almost forgotten. It calls to mind the many delightful hours that we have passed in the society of friends, and conjures the shades of bygone times until I can almost hear the voices which death has silenced, and can see the forms which can never more meet my eyes. Monday evening. I'm almost frightened when I take a review of this little imperfect journal, which I've kept for the last 6 years, that find many of its pages recording the death of one of my acquaintances. And I tremble at the idea that I am destined to sigh a requiem over all that I love or value upon earth. So many, so very many of my dearly cherished friends have laid down in their youth the burden of life and pillowed their heads in dust, that my heart shudders as it asks, who shall be next? Mercy of mercies, I cannot answer. April 8th. Meeting is out. Well, I have been worshiping in my own way, communing with God through the medium of his own works, and gazing with an eye of admiration on the splendors of his beautiful world. I paid a sincere tribute to the hand which made them. And I've done this without regard of creed or sectarian forms of belief. I am a disciple of the religion of nature, and believe that man may lift his heart to God with as much sincerity in a black coat as a brown one, and that the savage who wears no coat at all may lay bare his heart before his master amid the wilds of his native forest with as pure a feeling of devotion, and offer as acceptable incense before his throne in the untaught religion of native feeling as that which ascends weekly from the lips of those who have learned their religion from books, and who worship by rule, according as convenience and fashion dictate. I've been out walking to enjoy the beautiful moonlight, and in truth, it is seldom that we have an evening of such still, undisturbed loveliness. I've heard the frogs croak for the first time this season. I love to hear them, for their sound always awakens a train of pleasing associations and brings to mind the happy days of my childhood, which I spent among the rocks and brooks of Connecticut with my good old grandmother. Sheldon Overton has deigned to make inquiries concerning me, and has moreover sent his compliments. 'Tis very gratifying to be thus held in remembrance by an old acquaintance, and especially an old flame. I should like to see the youth very much, but I forget myself, as he whom I know as a stripling 7 years ago, since must have become a man. And oh, melancholy reflection, I am myself no longer a frolicking girl of 17, but on the contrary, a sober, demure, truth-speaking damsel, close verging upon 24. Ah, woe is me, my day is well nigh over. The harvest is past, the summer ended, and I am not married. The trees are just expanding their green foliage, and the pale buds of the peach tree are opening in beautiful profusion. The ocean looks calm and beautiful, as if its surface was never ruffled. How many delightful hours I've spent strolling upon the beach, listening to the ceaseless surge as it died away and swelled again, wave after wave. More than once I've climbed to the lighthouse in Montauk to catch the sun's first rays as they streamed on the dancing wave, and never in my life have I enjoyed more perfect happiness than when I was last at Montauk. We were all in such fine spirits, so well satisfied with everything, it seemed as if the very spirit of enjoyment had descended upon us. Years have passed away, and our happy party has never met since. Here I am at the last page. It is a little more than a year since I commenced this journal. I fear I've not been able to keep all the good resolutions which I formed in the beginning. If I have done wrong to any, I have done it in ignorance. If I've given offense, it has been unintentional. These pages have been written as a recreation of my idle hours. They've offered me some salutary lessons, and have taught me by the number of deaths recorded the instability of the world's enjoyments. They've afforded me proof on almost every page that man was made to mourn, and I feel the full force of the saying, man is but a vapor and life a vision. Ah, who can prize life like this, so deeply fraught with sorrow?
That ends the first portion of her diaries, unfortunately, because if she had kept writing, we would have found out what the inspiration was for her book, Sea Spray. That was a thinly veiled story of East Hampton. And the book is very important because she's really telling everybody what East Hampton was like during the summertime. And guess what? In the 1840s, this place was packed with people. So it wasn't after the Civil War or when the artists came or when the railroad came. It was before that this place was crowded. And the other thing that we miss is the beginning of St. Luke's Church. And how that came about and what her role was in that. So we missed those two things, unfortunately. But while she was not writing, the world went on. The whaling trade fell off. I think 1870 was the last whale ship that went out. It was just becoming too expensive to arm these ships and pay and then come back with very little oil. So and then the whales, of course, got smart and left, or they were overfished. Sag Harbor almost burned down twice, in 1817 and in 1845. And that's why the Sag Harbor Fire Department was started in the Otter Hose Company, I believe, in 1818. It's the second oldest fire company in New York State. Julia Gardner married President John Tyler during this time. St. Luke's Chapel was built. In 1849, they had the celebration of the 200th anniversary of East Hampton's founding. And the celebration was at the Thomas D. Parsons Hotel on Main Street, which in 1901 was moved down to Main Beach and became the Sea Spray. And at that celebration, her odes were sung. In 1842, Lyman Beecher and his two sons came back to East Hampton to preach. I would love to know what she thought of that, because Beecher left because we didn't pay him enough money. He may have left anyway, we're not sure. The presbytery took over control of the East Hampton Presbyterian Church from the town trustees, I think in 1848. The John Milton crashed off of Montauk, and the bell wound up in the session house of the Presbyterian Church. And Jeremiah Baker started running his stage, as I told you before, from Amagansett to Sag Harbor. The Presbyterian Church in Amagansett was built in 1860. So all those events happened while she was not writing her diary, unfortunately. Okay.
East Hampton, February 20th, 1861. I sewed all morning and went to Clinton Academy in the afternoon to attend the examination of the school. Mr. Fordham has a fine school, and the whole arrangements were highly creditable, both to master and pupils. I enjoyed it very much. Some of it showed me how much less I know than I did 40 years ago. March 13th. Have done Mrs. Mulford's work and taken it home, incidentally making a call. George and Mamie gone to Montauk. Have made some progress today on the third shirt for George, but do not feel well enough to bend down to confining work, so I've been knitting part of the day. Abby has finished one pair of Mamie's stockings and commenced the first of the second pair, which I have done a little work upon, but I've been reading for Georgie's benefit most of the evening. He had a very sociable, pleasant call from Mr. Fordham. Delightful weather, sleighs flying. I found some work, for I have concluded to work enough of the fine linen I have been doing at intervals for so long a time to trim a skirt. Sumter not yet evacuated, and I have ceased to feel any interest in anything pertaining to secession. April 1st, raw, chilly, easterly morning. I can't go to the harbor, so I've cut out a small collar to embroider for myself. I trust there's no sin in sometimes using my needle for my own benefit. Great news. Sumter has fallen and the long agony of suspense is over. There are so many conflicting reports and such seeming inconsistency of action that it is impossible to arrive at any settled opinion upon the subject. We shall see what developments will follow this step. Meantime, we want further advices. 17th, sewed all day, then put on my new dress and went over to the academy to see the school performances. I was very much pleased with the whole, for there was not one such painful balk and failure as I have sometimes seen. There was some of the grandest acting I have ever seen there before. Anyway, I did not get home till nearly midnight. 21st, I'd been to church all day, though sick with a cold and kept under the influence of an opiate. Very small attendance at chapel, but a great turnout at the old meeting house to hear Mershon's war sermon. Great excitement occasioned by a telegram saying that Jeff Davis had marched upon Washington at the head of 100,000 men and taken the capital. The story was either the blundering ignorance of the operator at the office or a mischievous hoax got up by boys for Mershon's benefit. May 8th. Still at work on my dress, but without interest in anything. I've scratched an ode for the old flag raising, but without any spirit of ambition, and it does not amount to much or please me at all. I went to Kitty's for a while. Mary's going to Orient tomorrow. A letter from Ben. All is well.
Well, what he's talking about, of course, is in 1861, they put up a flagpole in between the current LVIS building and the Hunting Inn. At that time, the LVIS building was owned by the Gardners and the house was right up next to the fence, next to the street. And the Huntings lived across the street. So they put the flagpole up there, and I'm pretty sure she had something to do with the flag, making the flag. So it says from the Sag Harbor Express, a large union gathering. Tuesday last was a day of rejoicing at East Hampton, a long to be remembered by true lovers of the Union. A short notice had been given that an elegant flag made by the fair fingers of that place was to be unfurled on the new pole which they had just erected. Crowds of people to the number of 500 or 600 assembled beneath the folds of the Star-Spangled Banner. The assembly was called to order by appointing Dr. George L. Huntington, that's Cornelia's brother, chairman, and George Hand, Esquire, secretary. George Hand at that time lived in Village, what is now Village Hall, which was Lyman Beecher's house. The chairman, on ascending the stage, made a few interesting remarks with the choir, and then the choir sang the Star-Spangled Banner. The Reverend Stephen L. Mershon made an elegant address of some half hour in length. When an ode written for the occasion by Miss Cornelia Huntington was read, and John Wallace, Esquire, was the one who read the ode, because women weren't supposed to speak in public, of course. And then the choir also sang a song, and then there was this band. Let me get the name of this band. It wasn't from Sag Harbor, it was the Union Band for some reason. Wait a minute. Hold it. Well, never mind. I can't find it. But the flagpole is 105 feet high and it cost $120. And the Long Island Coast Guard made a fine display on the occasion. And you know who wasn't there? The supervisor of East Hampton, Stephen Hedges, whose house is right next to Barbara Borsack's. He was a Northern Democrat at the time. So he wasn't, he probably wasn't for secession, but he certainly didn't vote for Lincoln. And he was notably absent. Okay.
May 18th. The flag was raised this afternoon from the center of the old willow tree and floated out barely on the fine breeze, quite an assemblage to see it go up amid cannonading and cheering. It has taken me all afternoon to clear up the mess they made under the tree. George and Abel are both busy professionally. Abel has pocketed his first $5 fee. Abby's sick in bed all day with a headache. 21st. Great gathering to hear the addresses at the flag raising, which I did not attend. Mrs. Mershon, the elder, very sick. No news, and as we are both sick with headache, we will retire and sleep it off. May 25th. Raining all morning. I've been very busy with my cloak, but have not finished it. The flags at half-mast and bells tolling for the terrible death of Colonel Ellsworth, a bad beginning to a desperate campaign. A call from Mrs. Baker. Colonel Ellsworth of the 11th New York entered the Marshall House in Alexandria, Virginia, and took down the flag from the roof. He had been able to see the flag from the White House when he met with Lincoln. The innkeeper met him coming down the stairs of the inn with the flag and killed him with a shotgun blast to the chest. The innkeeper was in turn killed by Ellsworth's colleague, Captain Brownwell. March 13th, 1863. George has gone to the Springs to minister to Henry Talmadge, who has blown his hand off by the accidental discharge of his gun. March 14th. Cook arrived at Talmadge's about 2 o'clock and amputated just below the elbow, so the poor fellow has a long period of helplessness to look forward to. Letter from Abel, containing no news in particular, except a specimen or 3 specimens of English town meeting tickets. Men are the same creatures, it seems, everywhere, groveling for little contemptible town offices. East Hampton War News, May to September, 1863. Great war news today. All things are possible with God. And it is just possible that he has turned a favorable ear to our petitions and taken the cause into his own hand. No news tonight except that Stonewall is dead. So that ends his career. No cheering news tonight. The two great armies are eyeing each other across the Rappahannock like 2 noisy curs whose bark is worse than their bite. The mail brings news of the capture of Vicksburg, but not being deemed perfectly reliable, the flag will not go up until the arrival of tomorrow's mail. A letter from Ben announcing the birth of another daughter. He performs without promising, and so is unlike the Army of the Potomac, which promises without performing. Great rebel invasion of Maryland and Pennsylvania. Terrible excitement and troops hurrying off to repel the invaders. The valiant New York 7th leading the van. Lee's army in Pennsylvania and Hooker removed from the command of the Army of the Potomac. Well, what next? Nothing but more birth from the same old bone. News from the seat of war, more and more discouraging and provoking, but there is hope that something more decisive may come of it this time, for they are both in desperate straits. Great and glorious news. Lee's army, if not conquered, at least wounded and driven back. Late telegrams say surrendered, but that's too good news to be swallowed whole. Lee has escaped while the great man slept. I knew he would. It will take wide awake folks to trap a Lee. I'm one of the tribe, I ought to know. Anyway, he's the best commander this war has called forth. Port Hudson taken, Charleston attacked, and New York disgraced before the civilized world. February 17th, the war is at an end, and the soldiers' aid societies are among the things that were. Abraham Lincoln sleeps with his fathers, and Andy Johnson reigns in his stead. But peace is not in our councils, nor honor, nor truth, nor loyalty, nor sterling, God-fearing honesty in our halls of legislation. Neither is meek, unpretentious piety in our churches, but contentions and bickerings and self-seeking and all sorts of wickedness and abominations disgrace and degrade the ordinances of what is falsely called religion. I can't see that the world has grown in grace much in the last 3 or 4 years, or that the flesh and the devil have lost any of their ascendancy. February 1867. More than 3 years since I penned a line. The dews of 2 summers have brightened the sods which cover the place where my dear, patient, suffering sister was laid to rest. I sit here alone in the room where we spent so many happy hours and keep fresh in my heart the lessons of unselfish kindness and affection which were written in her every tone and of which her whole life was a holy exemplification. Great changes have taken place since I last wrote. Charles Gardner and Abel have taken wives, both beautiful, intelligent, and interesting women. Ben has given another daughter to the family, having more than ordinarily lovely children. Fanny Maples remains in Ohio, Charles at Cairo, Abel is in the successful practice of his profession at Islip. And our present family consists of George and Mary, Georgie, Mamie, and myself, Mr. Wallace, who has been 2 years confined to his room, and Bridget in the kitchen. February 23rd, 1867. How beautiful beyond anything man can imitate the earth looks under the handiwork of God. Every branch and twig, roof and fence, every inanimate thing clothed in the purest of earthly things, snow. Ah, how soon it will be soiled and stained and trodden underfoot by mangle and beast, lost in the dust and mire. But I had to open my windows, for although the earth is shrouded deeply in snow, the air feels balmy and refreshing, and the merry notes of the woodpecker and wren speak hopefully of spring. May 15th. Another thunder squall, sending down the rain and floods and causing house cleaning and airing beds and carpets to come to hurried termination. I've created 100 of the 400 blocks requisite for the quilt I have in the process of construction. Many people laugh at the folly of making patchwork. Let them laugh. They have no music in their souls, or at any rate, no poetical associations called up by the sight of a calico dress worn by a beloved household companion or a dear, kind neighbor long years ago. I like to look over quilts which Abby and I worked over together to think, this was dear little Charlie's dress when he wore skirts. I can see him now, just as he looked with his kitten in his arms the first time he wore it. How all the circumstances come up now, the ride that pleasant June morning, the walk with Abby and Charlie a few days later, the dress I wore, the conversation, all called up by a little piece of calico. And I can recall the conversations and incidents occurring while I sat with Abby at snatches of leisure and put together the little squares which were to grow in due line and proportions for a quilt under our united manipulations. I still adhere to the fact that it is not absurd or ridiculous to amuse oneself with making patchwork. It saves the waste fragments of cloth and occupies the waste moments of time. And in after years, if one is sentimental, it opens up volumes of thought and tender remembrances and calls up facts and tones and times and scenes of joy and sorrow by which the whole tone and character of the present is softened and purified by remembering. If I was cold and needed covering for my bed, I could buy it. But when my heart is crusted over with selfishness and indifference to my fellows, Give me an old-time patchwork quilt to bring back the tears to stern eyes and something of the glow and warmth of bygone years to chilled feelings. Juliet is about to open her house for boarders. It seems to me the whole world is running mad, and quiet home comfort and present dignity and independence are driven out of place. If I could get salt pork and herrings, I would eat it in the piece of my own board and sleep in my own bed. I would sooner bow to King Cotton than to their imperial majesties, boarders. But servitude brings money, and money buys dresses. Hallelujah, amen. Call from Hitty and Juliet. Nothing in their hearts and on their lips but boarders and lodgers and rooms and terms, as if God made just two classes of people in the world, one to take board and one to take boarders. I wish they were all at Antietam. Another pressing invitation to let out room to lodgers, and a call to hire one of our large rocking chairs. Confound them. Their insolence is insufferable. I won't have any of the tribe in my house. 4 days later. Georgie has come home from Montauk unharmed, arriving midday, tired, dirty, ragged, and hungry, with a great goose as the final result of nearly 4 days vagabonding in the hills and beside the ponds of Montauk. But he says they had a pleasant time and been very comfortable. June 24th. This is my 64th birthday. Well, I must try to be more dignified and stately, or I shall be a flippant fool.
Well, she had to be reading newspapers. You have all that knowledge of the war and what was going on. She must have been reading newspapers constantly. She also, of course, was the first woman published author in East Hampton with her book, her novel, The Sea Spray. She wrote it under a pseudonym, Martha Wickham. So I'm assuming that was Mrs. Wickham's first name, Colonel Thomas Wickham's wife. She was probably the smartest person in town, and that's why she scared all the men away, I'm sure. And you could see her tongue could be quite acidic if she wanted it to be. I'm pretty sure she went to Clinton Academy, even though she doesn't talk about it. Her odes were sung in 1849 and at the 1899 celebrations of East Hampton's history. And in 1998, we read them at the flagpole. We read one of her odes at the flagpole at the opening of the 350th anniversary. Her poems were published after her death by her nephew, Abel Huntington. And of course, she was an early communicant of St. Luke's Church. I don't think there's been another woman in East Hampton like her. I just wish we could have had more of her diary. I mean, that's my final point. I wish we could have had more. Yeah. That's it for me.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Barbara. If you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. We had a couple that popped up while you were presenting. The diaries are available in the Long Island collection of the East Hampton Library. That's correct. Are they published anywhere or available in any other format?
You'll have to ask the Leminska family. All we know is what we have in the Long Island room.
Okay. Okay.
Right, Barbara?
Yeah, that's all I know about. Yeah.
Okay. And, when we were talking yesterday, I think it would be interesting to just kind of talk about, for everyone else, just her lifestyle and what women were expected to do and their daily activities. And just, my comment is her obsession with getting married and relationships and things like that. Maybe we could just talk for a minute about the daily role of women at that time.
Well, I think she must have been bored a lot of the time because she was so intelligent. I mean, she had a father who was a doctor, a brother who was a doctor. She was pretty much self-taught. I mean, she did do some schooling, but I think they had a good library of books, my guess would be, and she read them. She was very smart, and I think she was bored because from what she says in her diaries, she is mostly sewing and knitting and repairing and housekeeping, and that was what women did in those days. And I think being married, while it was a lot of work, it did afford children. some amusement, I think. I don't know. I mean, she does talk in her diaries. I mean, it's great to read the whole diary because she does have an interesting life. She goes into New York City, and in the lecture that we did in 2012, I read a long portion of her adventures in New York City, which were really fun to hear, because you don't think about people in the mid 1800s traveling into New York City from here, but she did, and she stayed for weeks. And she had a lot of adventures in there. She went to the theater, and she found it very exciting to be in the city, which makes sense because she was so smart. And I think, East Hampton was probably a little bit dull for her. That's just my interpretation, but I
Well,
can't imagine it myself.
Well, Joy just sent something, and I was just going to say it. John Wallace also lived in that house, and he
Yes.
was pretty smart.
Mhm.
I think he was, as she said, he was intellectually stimulating. I think that's a good way to point it. He gave some of the first services of St. Luke's Church
Right.
when it was beginning. So, but some of her words that she says could be said about women's problems today. I
Yes.
mean, she was a little ahead of her time there, or we're behind the time, right? Don't you
Well,
think?
I think progress has been very slow,
Yeah.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
but she was a real character. I really enjoyed reading her diaries.
This is Susan Leminska. Am I unmuted?
Hi.
Hi. What I was always told was that John Wallace served as a tutor to Georgie Huntington, the last George Huntington, MD. And so I think he would have been highly educated, and I agree with Joy that he would have been a source of stimulation in the house. Also, prior to donating the original copies of the diaries to the Long Island collection, I had them typed into computer files, and I have those available if anyone is interested in getting an email. I could attach the files of a typed version of the diaries. The originals in the archives of the Long Island collection are fragile and can't be handled a lot, but I have all the content in computer files.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll coordinate that with you after the program.
What was
Appreciate
her
it.
mother's name?
Francis Lee.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, he married Abel Huntington, the Honorable Abel married Frances Lee in Norwich, Connecticut. I don't have the name. And then they moved to East Hampton in 1797. I don't have the year that they got married. And then they had 4 children, Marietta, Cornelia, Abby, and George Lee.
George Lee. Okay. Got it.
So someone just asked about it. I'll reach out to Susan and we'll get the manuscripts, and then I will send it out to the list of the attendees. So I have everyone's email address, so no worries about that. Thanks. Thank you, Susan. Anybody have any other questions for our speakers? Barbara, do you want to talk about what's next for you?
What's next for me? Oh, you mean my book? Oh. Oh, I'm excited. I've written a children's book about growing up in the Montauk Lighthouse, which my great grandmother did. And there were a lot of stories handed down through the ages that she told. So I've written a book, and it's going to be published. It should be available in another month. So we'll be setting up a Facebook page and a website where it can be sold, and it should be available in local stores. So this summer you should look for it if you're interested in that.
Thank you. Last chance for any questions.
That's everyone.
We should mention maybe the next lecture.
The book, the children's book that you just mentioned.
No, I said we should mention the next lecture.
Oh, no. I know someone has asked what the title of your children's book
Oh,
is.
the book is called Keeping the Montauk Light.
Okay, and I will send, someone said, can we send that out to everyone? And I'll send that out to all the attendees also.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. So on behalf of the East Hampton Historical Society, I would like to thank Barbara Borsack and Hugh King for joining us tonight and providing this wonderful presentation for us. And a very warm appreciation to each and every one of our guests for your continued support. We hope that you enjoyed this. And please continue to visit our website, easthamptonhistory.org, for more information about our upcoming events and programs, including our next lecture, Turn of the Century Tales from Wainscot Dumplings by Alice E. Osborne Hand, 1879 to 1968, with Hilary Osborne Malecki, and that's on Friday, April 30th at 7 p.m. So thank you again.
Thank you, everybody.
Wonderful evening.
Thank you.